All right, so here is one of the most interesting gaming laptops of the year, the Asus Flow Z13. If you've been around on my channel for a while, and thank you if you have, you'll know I'm a big fan of the Asus Flow lineup, and honestly I wish it had gotten more love in 2024 and 2025, with the Flow X16 being one of my favorite gaming laptops of all time. But hey, at least we got one refresh of the Flow line here, so that's the Z13. And boy is this thing one of the craziest devices I've ever laid my hands on. I made sure to really take my time with this one since it was so unique, and we've got a lot of comparisons to other devices to talk about, so buckle in. So the spec we have here is the AMD Ryzen AI Max plus 395 CPU. Yeah, it's a mouthful. Come on. Get it together, AMD. This is getting ridiculous now. It's to the point where it's so confusing for the consumer that it's just laughable. Like, I'm so sorry if you're new to computer specs, but yeah, these days you have to pretty much study and go to college for a degree in naming schemes just to pick the right one. Anyways, it's a monster CPU, and I'll talk about that heavily since that's kind of the star of the show. But we've also got 32 gigabytes of RAM, which you can reallocate to VRAM for the integrated graphics if you'd like. This is really cool because they actually sell a 128 gigabyte version of this. So that means you can potentially have like 96 gigs of VRAM if you want on a tablet. So essentially more than any other laptop on the market. And you know, this won't help in games that much, but I know VRAM is important in some workflows like AI modeling. Also, I had someone correct me on system memory versus VRAM, but I don't know, I'm just gonna put their comment here because this reallocation stuff is still kind of new to me and a lot of people seem to disagree on what it does and all this stuff. I mostly deal with laptops that have a dedicated GPU, so this does not have that. All the power comes from the insane integrated graphics, the Radeon 8060S. This is essentially the most powerful iGPU that you can get right now that isn't on a MacBook. Look, one thing that people who appreciate technology also appreciate is just optimization, all right? We optimize everything. We optimize our games, we optimize our laptops, we optimize our PCs, we optimize our TVs, right? And I know a lot of you like to optimize everything in your life, including your sleep. And if you're not, then you should. So that's where NOLA mattresses come in, okay? We've got their #1 bestseller right here, the Evolution 15. This is a 15-inch mattress, okay? It's an extremely pressure relieving, award-winning premium mattress. You know, looking at this thing, seeing that it's a hybrid organic cotton foam coil mattress, you wouldn't think for a second this came here in a box, but I assure you it actually did. So I'm someone who does not like to sleep in a hot bed. I don't like to be sweating. I like to sleep on my side. I like something kind of soft, but I don't want to sink into it, you know, to where I can't even get out. So I chose the plush option here just because I read online that it actually is not too soft still. A lot of people say that the plush is actually just right. And sure enough, yeah, they're right. This thing is perfect. So that's why I thought I would give this one a shot, and boom, it gets delivered to the door, free shipping in the US. You roll it out, let it inflate, and they give you 120 nights to just give it a shot. Just see how you like it, which is pretty nice that they actually do that. And not only that, but you have a limited lifetime warranty, financing options, and flexible payment plans. Like, I've got to say, I've been sleeping on this thing for like 2 months now, and it's pretty much changed my life. I didn't think I was gonna really like the quilted style kind of pillow top at first, but it's actually super comfy. I didn't even realize before how much I was missing out on a good night's rest. I thought I liked the mattress that I had. It was like a flat top memory foam, and then I tried this and it's like, wait, this is way better. I'm waking up feeling refreshed, rejuvenated. I mean, come on. So yeah, I love my NOLA mattress. I think you will too. And if you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com/JoshCravesTech, promo code JoshCravesTech, get $50 off your mattress, get your 2 free pillows. This is a higher discount than what's being offered on the site, so definitely go check it out, and thank you NOLA for sponsoring this video. First, let's talk about this design. Like, wow, I think Asus really knocked it out of the park here. This tablet looks so nice and sleek, it is crazy. The metal body, the glossy display, the RGB window of heaven to the motherboard. Like, they even give you a really nice and sturdy hinge with a tiny clip on the side. And yeah, it is a little thick for a tablet, but really not bad at all considering how much power you're getting from a 13-inch device. So this one is just barely bigger and only like 0.05 pounds heavier than the previous Flow Z13, but all of that is warmly welcomed with the improvements that you get from it, especially since it's such a small device. This is the Flow Z13 on top of like a nice, you know, monster Legion Pro 7i, and one is definitely more portable than the other, let's be real here. And funny enough, this CPU actually outperforms this one, so we'll get into that too. And then the fan exhaust is just perfect. Like, one of my favorite parts about this guy is having the air come out of the top right here, so this gives you a huge advantage over like a run-of-the-mill laptop where the exhaust is coming out the sides or behind the laptop, because it's essentially like like having your laptop off the ground. So that's giving you better cooling, and you know, heat isn't really generating in your lap, so you're not incinerating your thighs or your hands from the heat. And surprisingly, the stand is sturdy enough to support working on your lap pretty easily. So you might have to adjust it from time to time. And yeah, just being able to lift it like I do with most laptops. I even accidentally have closed it a few times, like facing forward, and just seen it like slap on the desk. I didn't break it though, so that's a good testament to the display's sturdiness at least. Speaking of the keyboard, this is the best folio keyboard that I think I've ever used. It's sturdy and the keys actually have a good amount of travel distance. Sure, it's a bit more wobbly than your standard laptop keyboard, of course, but I was not really ever bothered by that, and it actually feels even better to type on if you shift it to lay flat on a desk like this. Here's a sound sample in comparison to some others. And one feature some people might like is just taking that thing right off, and now you can use the device as a tablet. I found the 13.4-inch screen was nice for watching videos on YouTube up close and just browsing. Everything felt very responsive, especially the pen support. I used the Microsoft Surface Slim Pen, and I was actually surprised how responsive it was. It reminded me of my first time using like the Apple Pencil with an iPad Pro, just super smooth with good pressure sensitivity and responsiveness. Palm rejection was great as well. Once I got the hang of it, you almost have to like start drawing first and then rest your palm for like the best experience there, but you get used to it. Tablet mode is also a great way for gaming on controller, so you can just put the screen, you know, really close to you and you're good to go. This was something I kind of missed doing from back when I had the Flow X16, so it was nice to revisit gaming like this. I even rebought a Flow X16 for a future video, but I'll show them side by side so you can get an understanding of size. Also, because it's a tablet first and foremost, you get buttons on the sides. One of which is a cool little quick action button, which I wish they had on every laptop now after using this. You can basically change performance modes on the fly and change other quick settings that you can customize in the Armoury Crate software to show up here. I also didn't find myself accidentally pressing the power button thanks to it being recessed on the chassis, so good thinking, Asus. Now, the webcam isn't too bad, plus there's a 4K rear-facing camera, which even though I'm not sure when I'd find the need to use that, I still think it's a really cool feature. And of course, it looks better than the front-facing one as well. All right, here's the webcam on the Flow Z13. It's not terrible when there's some light behind you, but the second you're in the darkness, it really overexposes. As for ports, we're pretty stacked considering that this is tablet. Like we have HDMI 2.1 FRL, we have two USB 4 ports, so Thunderbolt compatible with up to 100 watt power delivery, and DisplayPort 2.1, which is an upgrade over their last model's DisplayPort 1.4, and a UHS 2 micro SD card reader, so super fast. And on the right, we have a USB-A 3.2 Gen 2 port. The power adapter is fairly compact at 200 watts compared to the massive 400 watt ones I'm seeing this year from other brands, but it actually has a secret weapon, and that's because you can get away with using a 100 watt USB-C power brick and still get the same level of performance as the main brick without even draining the battery, which I'll talk about later. So internally, there's a lot that makes this tablet special, and really that's just it having the beefiest cooling system of any tablet ever in here. Two fans, a new stainless steel and copper vapor chamber that they say has 55% more coverage than the previous Z13, and of course, liquid metal to go with that. Of course, this is a tablet, so upgradability is kind of like not much of a thing, but you do have access to a 2230 NVMe drive with actually decent speeds. You got Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 5.4, and of course, soldered LPDDR5X RAM, which isn't too bad considering you can get this thing configured up to 128 gigs. So personally, I don't really have a problem with that here. And it's running extremely fast at 8,000 megahertz. So that's actually pretty crazy. For the display, I was extremely impressed. Like this is a 13.4 inch QHD 180 hertz IPS panel with a glossy Gorilla Glass coating. So yeah, that's a lot of good specs. It handles reflections really well. It has AMD FreeSync, 100% DCI-P3 color gamut, so colors really pop on this thing. And they're very accurate with a delta E of 0.66. Asus specs say that it goes up to 500 nits of brightness, but I actually measured it at 610 nits peak, which is super nice for an IPS panel and almost at mini LED levels. We love to see that. So for an IPS display, this is way up there. Of course, you do get some of the downsides that come with IPS, like potential backlight bleed or contrast that isn't quite as good as OLED. But I mean, comparing it to like a MacBook Pro 13 M1 that I had here, I found it way more pleasant than that one. And even next to the OLED G16, it didn't look too bad outside of these, you know, super contrasty areas. The brightness is really what helps pack that punch, even next to these OLED displays. Oh, also a huge heads up if you buy this guy, please turn off the auto color management in Windows. For some reason, this is enabled by default. Thanks, Windows. But for real, I thought this display was only sRGB at first until I found out that that was on. So that basically clamps the color gamut down to sRGB instead of DCI P3. So that's gonna mute your colors and make them less vibrant, which that's what we're used to now. So great job, Windows, don't do that again. Now the speakers are nothing to write home about. I'll play some clips here of a speaker test that I wrote and had AI write instruments to. It has 4 speakers, but really they don't have any bass and they sound a bit harsh and tinny. I was able to slightly fix this using some really extreme EQ curve and Dolby Access, but yeah, I almost had to like delete entire frequencies because of how harsh they come through on this guy. So I'll play my speaker test first with the normal stock audio settings, but I'm gonna throw in a couple clips with the EQ'd version to give you an idea of how it can sound at least a little bit better.
Laptop speaker test. Laptop speaker. Sound so loud and clear. Can you hear the noise? Did your eardrums get destroyed by these laptop speakers? Get a plane for you.
All right, so Armoury Crate got a slight facelift here, and it works a little bit differently now than it used to. Mostly everything's here, it's just kind of moved around. So now the home screen has just your operating modes, your fan profiles here. So a lot of settings were moved to different pages, and I'll go over that here in a second. So Windows mode just goes off of Windows settings, how it thinks your device should be controlled. Don't typically recommend this. And then there's silent mode, where you're trying to get to as close to 0 decibels as possible. You can see it's currently at like 2600 RPM, which on this is very quiet, like I can't even hear it right now. Performance mode is like basically balance mode. I don't know why they even call it performance, but it gives you a good balance of fan noise and performance. And then turbo mode is not like maxed out fans, but it is loud fans with very good CPU and GPU power going to it. Then of course there's manual mode, which gives you a lot more customization over what you want to do with your CPU. So you can choose to max your sustained power limit up to 80 watts. So that's the CPU wattage that it can sustain indefinitely. You can have your SPPT, which is your how long it can sustain for 2 minutes. That can go up to 92 watts and then 93 watts for your 10-second boost. The fan curves are pretty aggressive on this one. It does not want you to set them too low at all on this device, which is kind of a shame. Normally you can make a decent like silent profile or balanced profile, but this fan curve is much more in line with the stock turbo profile, which is kind of a bummer. You have that fan and then the other fan, which again is about the same. One cool thing though is you can make different manual modes. You can have multiple for when you're plugged in and multiple for when you're unplugged. And then you just hit apply when you're ready to go. Now back to the home screen here. System settings or devices is pretty much where the rest of the settings lie on this guy. So you have Windows key disabling here. You can disable the side button like the Command Center ROG key. You have a function lock, which is awesome to see on ROG laptops since they didn't have that for a while until like this past year. You can disable the touchpad. You can disable the boot up sound. You have modern standby assistant here, which basically makes the laptop go into hibernate instead of sleep if it's been sleeping for too long. That way it avoids battery drain and just Windows, awful implementation of sleep. Panel overdrive, of course, panel power saver, which puts it into 60 Hertz when you're on battery automatically. And then power mode synchronization, which all that does is synchronize your power profiles with the power and battery settings on Windows. So turbo mode's going to show best performance, and then, balance mode will be balance mode, and these have their independent screen timeouts and sleep timeouts. Memory assigned to iGPU, so this is your VRAM allocation to the integrated graphics. You can go as low as 0.5 gigabytes and have it all go to RAM, or you can go as high as 24 gigabytes. This is on the 32 gigabyte model. Again, they have a 128 version, so you know that one you just have basically unlimited potential. Keyboard, this gives you your keyboard color changing lights. This is a not per key RGB, just one zone, so you have a few different options here. The rear window, this is the glass window on the back of the device. You can change the colors for that. And then there's nothing else really interesting other than like gimmicky stuff. The really other interesting stuff maybe is game visual. You can change your color gamut profiles here. These all have like different contrast and different color temperature settings, but I don't typically recommend using those unless you're just going for a certain look. And then you can disable like the pop-up that shows up when you first reboot the laptop, and you also have a hotkey to switch game visual modes. Last thing of really any use is the settings, which you can change your themes for Armoury Crate, and then you have like your Armoury Crate updates right here. And yeah, that's about it. Oh, and there's a new boot up sound, which is kind of nice. It's much less embarrassing than the sword noise that these laptops used to have. Of course, you can still disable this though if you want. And you guys know I always recommend G-Helper. The only thing you miss out on G-Helper with this device, if you like having that command center, is that little minimalist Armoury Crate window that you can customize. Instead of that, it just gets replaced with the G-Helper window, which I mean, I don't mind, but some of you might. Just wanted to point that out. And then the fan tuning isn't really any different or better than the stock manual fan curve on G-Helper, and that's just because Asus really locked the fans down on this one. All right, so fan noise. I'm a little conflicted here. I feel it runs its fans a little too loud overall for like the thermal headroom that it has, but I'll go into more detail on that in a second. So silent mode, as it says, is silent when you're doing basic tasks or when you're just on battery. However, I did notice that it would occasionally ramp the fans up just a tiny bit while browsing. I would love to see it stay off during these tasks, but it's quiet enough overall. Like I could barely hear it. Under load though, silent mode is way too loud. Ideally, we want to see a silent mode under load around 35 decibels for, you know, an experience that doesn't catch the attention of everyone in the room around you. Balance mode is what I'd say is the sweet spot for this laptop. You get about 45 to 50 watts of power, and that's pretty good for this device, and not much more fan noise than silent mode, about 43.5 decibels. And then turbo mode is, again, a little too loud for my liking, hitting a little over 50 decibels on average, which ideally I'd like to see laptops stay under 50 decibels at head level in turbo mode. That's a sound level that you can definitely hear from maybe the next room over in your home if you have the door open. But let's take it a bit farther than the other reviews that we see out there. This is my baby right here, all right? This is my little science experiment. This is the TimeSpy graphics to fan noise ratio chart. And what this does is it shows you how much graphics performance you get for each decibel of fan noise. So the light blue bars here are the decibels of fan noise, which we want to see lower, and the dark blue bars are how much graphics score that you get for each decibel. So this is your graphical output that you get for how much fan noise that you're putting out, which we want to see that higher. Just keep in mind here though that there is going to be a bias for laptops with higher tier GPUs. So it's good to look at in comparison to similar GPUs. The Z13 here isn't doing super great in turbo mode, only barely beating the HP Omen 14 in graphics score for each decibel. Then in balance mode, like I said, this is where I consider the sweet spot. 43.5 decibels, 243 points per decibel. Overall, a good score, and it's in line with most RTX 4070 laptops here. Silent mode, it's again barely ahead of the HP Omen 14 at 192 points per decibel. Now lastly, here's some noise samples compared to some other laptops for reference. I like to use the Flow X16 as like my standard of comparison because it's really good for fan tuning. Although I did find that the 2023 model is definitely a little bit louder now than it was at launch, but all things aside, I've updated my graphs for that. Take a look. Okay, so battery life. A lot of people were curious about this, and it's honestly pretty great. I mean, nothing too crazy. It's a 70 watt-hour battery, so we're gonna be a little bit behind the competition, but 8.5 hours is not bad at all. I mean, that's way better than your typical HX CPU laptops will get, and for a CPU that outperforms those, that's pretty crazy to see. I did try a lot of tweaks to try and get it higher, but I couldn't, unfortunately. So this seems to be about what you're gonna see without some major tweaking. Unfortunately, gaming on battery did not really result in any better battery life than most most other laptops. I messed around with like wattage limits and I tried for like hours to make it do amazing here, but it really needs to be about 30 watts for gameplay to be even remotely smooth. And that comes out to about a max of 2-ish hours. So I don't really recommend it as a battery gaming device. But the Z13 has a secret weapon that I haven't seen many reviewers talk about, and that's how good the USB-C power delivery is on this thing. So you can actually game at near the max wattage using this guy, but you get the same performance out of this without any battery discharge off a 100-watt USB-C power brick, which a lot of them, like this one, plugs just straight into the wall and is a lot more compact and saves you a lot of space for traveling and weight. So that's actually crazy to see. Like most other laptops will severely limit their power when you're charging on USB-C because they're trying to prevent battery discharge while you're gaming, but the Z13 gives you essentially identical performance as being plugged into the wall for the regular power adapter. So you're gonna see more these soon, but again, this is actually insane. Like I could comfortably game in turbo mode off USB-C and it was the same as using the 200-watt power adapter. In fact, in balance mode, I actually gained charge while I was gaming. The only way I can make the battery discharge was by going into manual mode around like 80 watts or so, which isn't even necessary. So yeah, I mean, this guy has a nice little trick up its sleeve with USB-C power. Who would have known? Okay, let's talk about the real star of the show here, the Ryzen AI Max CPU. This is an absolute monster CPU, okay? Just pure insanity. I'm still in disbelief that this CPU and this guy right here beats out basically every other laptop CPU on the market at the time of this video at least. And it does all that while still having amazing efficiency and battery life. This little guy is on par with many desktop CPUs, and it's in this little tablet that runs it up to like 100 watts. It's like having a golf cart with a Ferrari engine in it, okay? It's crazy. So first of all, the CPU, nicknamed Strix Halo, doesn't really need a dedicated GPU since it has the best integrated graphics performance on the market for any Windows laptop, just right there built into the chip. And we'll talk about that more in detail next. Not only that, but it doesn't even use that much power to get most of the performance that it has. So I'm showing the standard graphs here first, but wait until we get to the power scaling because that's where the money is, okay? You're gonna be shocked. So in Cinebench R23, we're right under the new monster Intel CPU, the 275HX, but this only tells part of the story, okay? So just wait. Either way though, this is essentially an efficient CPU that is far surpassing the next nearest efficient CPU on here, the Ryzen HX 370, which was already great. The next nearest efficient CPU is the Core Ultra 185H from Intel at 38% lower performance than this. That story changes even more when we decide to undervolt. This now becomes the only CPU that I've ever seen reach 40,000 points in Cinebench R23, all with just an undervolt and increasing the power limit to 130 watts using UXTU. The Intel 275HX, on the other hand, can also be undervolted, of course, but I couldn't get quite to 40K, even at over 180 watts of power. And to be fair, I have seen them hit 40K or more. It takes a lot of overclocking and extra tuning as well. And that's the new Legion Pro 7i, by the way, which I have a review on the way for, so make sure you're subscribed for that. But even in balanced and silent mode, we are way beyond the competition, other than, of course, this new Intel chip. And then on battery and USB-C power delivery, it's not even close. Like, it's looking amazing. And here's Cinebench R24, which I don't really like to use for raw CPU performance because it doesn't really measure the same way. A lot of times it doesn't even use the full CPU power available, so that's why I really don't talk about this one that much. So I normally take these results with a grain of salt. All right, now the juicy part, okay? The power scaling graph. This right here is everything you want out of a laptop, okay? On the desktop side, they really only care about those top numbers, but on the laptop side of things, we want higher scores at lower wattages so that we can run our laptops cooler, quieter, and we get more battery life. So everything you want in a laptop is when you have things to the left and up. So the higher the score is on the left on the y-axis and the lower the wattage, the better the laptop, essentially. And that's where this one just dominates. Honestly, at every wattage level, this guy outperforms even the newest HX chip from Intel. And keep in mind, these Intel HX chips are essentially desktop chips in a laptop form factor. The biggest difference being at that 10 to 30 watt range, which while Intel did improve a lot there, we're still looking amazing with 57% more CPU power at 20 watt range specifically. And compared to last year's Intel HX RTX chips, we're looking at 163% more CPU performance than the 14900HX at 20 watts. And honestly, across the whole range, it's sitting way higher than those. The only chip that even comes close is the Ryzen AI HX 370, which is neck and neck up until about 40 watts, where the Max 365 just keeps climbing while the 370 sort of trickles off. Yeah, I'm gonna throw some MacBook data on here that I got from the internet just to show you guys, because I know some people are curious about comparisons to MacBook, and it does kind of do really well against the regular M4, M3, all that stuff. It only gets beaten out by like the M4 Pro 14 core and the M4 Max. So honestly, still really good even in comparison to Mac, which has been dominating the low power, high performance areas for a long time. And of course, it goes way beyond those M4 processors once you get above like 50, 60 watts or so, since those are kind of stuck around like only 1 or 2 wattage points. And yeah, this guy handles undervolting really well. This graph doesn't show undervolting, but I did about like a -30 on the curve optimizer in UXTU, which is coming soon to G-Helper for this laptop. And it's basically just free extra performance. I also have a single core power scaling graph, and yeah, it's not quite as impressive here, but still overall pretty good and about in line with the new Intel HX chip up until about 30 watts, which that one is able to go beyond. I'm throwing the MacBooks in here as well, and that's kind of just one area where Mac still dominates to this day, only needing about 5 watts while almost doubling everyone else. So single core Mac still wins. Now for some quirks, okay? So that's the core-to-core latency. The CCD latency on this is a little similar to the Ryzen AI 9 HX 370, which is a little unfortunate. I believe Asus did patch the HX 370 since I made my review for that one, so it's probably better now, but yeah, that one had about 98 nanoseconds on average, and the Z13 has about 61 nanoseconds on average, which on paper isn't bad. It's actually really decent. But it's when we look at the cores where you see how it works. So threads 1 through 16 seem to be excellent at around like 23, 24 nanoseconds, which is great. Then after thread 16, that core-to-core latency jumps to about 100 nanoseconds. So overall, this probably isn't as big of a deal as it was on the HX 370, since you're most often not gonna be using all 32 threads, but I'm sure this probably does have a slight impact on overall multi-core performance, and it could be causing a tiny bit less FPS in certain games. But overall, I don't really consider this a big deal. Now, this is also a CPU that handles disabling CPU boost pretty well. I know a lot of people like to do that, but yeah, disabling the boost caps the clock speed at around 3 gigahertz, but it can still run up to about 60 watts or so. But this gives you an bench score that's still extremely high at 25.5K, and it really doesn't drop gaming performance at all, since in games that CPU barely hits 3 gigahertz anyways. So you don't really see a temperature benefit in games, mostly just in CPU intensive tasks. So it's up to you whether it's worth it or not. Personally, I just leave it enabled. Oh, and side note, please, for the love of God, don't change the battery saver mode to always on. I probably wasted like half a day thinking that the Z13 had a power management issue when really I had just left this setting on by accident. This essentially disables the CPU from hitting anywhere close to its peak wattage, and it limits the performance heavily. So I'd be willing to bet this is a reason why a lot of people might have experienced CPU problems on a lot of laptops without even realizing it.
I also did experience just a couple little bugs, like for one, the rear window light would sometimes just randomly not come on. It could be fighting with like Windows dynamic lighting. That could be the reason why.
Okay, iGPU performance. Now, this part is a bit of a mixed bag with the GPU on this thing. So on one hand, it's the most powerful integrated graphics of any Windows laptop at the time. But on the and most dedicated GPUs will beat it in games. So, I mean, it's extremely special, but also not super special at the same time, just because of that. But either way, I applaud it. We're basically getting performance levels between an RTX 4060 and 4070, depending on the game. So sometimes it pulls ahead of those, and other times it falls way behind. Again, let's look at another power scaling graph. So just like with the CPU, again, this is the most important graph of all for laptops, okay? How much performance can we get at the lowest wattage possible? So less heat, less noise. We want things to be on the left and up high. This is showing you how much graphics score you get in 3D Mark Time Spy, which is basically reflective of how much FPS you'll get in games, essentially, for how much wattage that you're using down here on the x-axis. So the Z13's Radeon 8060S, you can see pretty much matches the RTX 4060 up until about 45 watts here, where it starts to surpass it until it trickles off at around 80 watts. And yeah, in our comparison against other laptops, it does sit right there, a bit under the RTX 4070 in turbo mode. And then in balance mode and silent mode, it starts to get a little less impressive, only to give us more hope again on battery and just demolishing everybody on USB-C power delivery, which is where this guy really shines. I thought this might be funny though. I made a comparison chart of just integrated graphics, and yeah, it looks really good on this one. But yeah, just keep in mind though, it uses way more wattage than the average integrated GPU, so that's why this comparison is a little silly. But hey, it's a tablet. And then I know Steel Nomad has been showing up a lot more lately, so here's those scores for those of you interested. Although I ride or die by 3D Mark Time Spy graphic scores, because those usually reflect really well in games, so I don't usually consider this benchmark quite as heavily as that one. Oh, also a quirk here, you know, there's no mux switch. It doesn't need one, you know, since the integrated graphics are always on, so that's kind of a nice feature. So you don't have to worry about, you know, Optimus, Advanced Optimus, DGPU mode, all that, because I know that confuses a lot of people. I see Reddit posts all the time and people just don't realize what that is. I might have to make like a whole video on just how Advanced Optimus works. But anyways, another thing people might find interesting is being able to reallocate RAM as VRAM to the integrated graphics. By default, this one came with 4 GB allocated to VRAM, which can actually hurt performance, but Asus did tell me that they're shipping these out with 8 GB by default instead. So just make sure to check that setting if you buy one. You definitely want at least 8 gigs going to VRAM if you're going to be gaming, because it does increase the performance a bit. I even tried 16 gigs allocated to graphics and it gave me like a couple more FPS, but nothing crazy. I think anything like beyond that point is kind of just redundant unless you have a serious need for it, like AI modeling or something like that. But still, overall, a really cool feature.
All right, so for thermals now, I wanted to do something a little more easy to replicate for other people, so I'm doing Shadow of the Tomb Raider because it actually does have a good amount of GPU and CPU stress on this benchmark, and you can even download the demo of the game and run this benchmark for free. So here you go. We're testing thermals and wattage here, all right? But I am going to change the settings to be more GPU bound and more CPU bound so that you can get an idea of how it's going to perform in each type of scenario. So turbo mode when we're GPU bound, I've mentioned the fans are a little too loud for this performance mode, and yeah, you can see that here. You know, the CPU is only hitting 69 degrees, which is nice, all right? So that's at 67 watts, looking really good here, you know, can't complain. There's plenty of thermal headroom, so, you know, this is a great result. Now, when we go to CPU bound, and of course, remember like loading screens and all that are also CPU bound, and you will see it hit like the 80s there, but you know, in a CPU bound gaming scenario here, we're at the lowest settings, and we will see that CPU go up a little bit as those clocks, now they're going into that 3 to 4 gigahertz range, so you're seeing the CPU hit, you know, the upper 70s now, which still is pretty fantastic considering 67 watts, just a higher clock speed than it was going before. Now, balance mode GPU bound, you're gonna have even more thermal headroom than you did on turbo. We're hitting like the mid 60s here. It was running pretty cool at 65 degrees, which is insane. I mean, there's so much thermal headroom. Again, I mean, the fans aren't even that bad in this power profile, but it could be even lower, honestly. And that's 47 watts going to the CPU. So great result there. In CPU bound and balance mode, you're looking at just slightly higher temps than when you're GPU bound. It's like 68, 69 degrees. Nice result. About 47, 48 watts going to the CPU. Really just good temps here, honestly. And when you're in silent mode GPU bound, temps are the lowest across any power profile. Like I said, the fans are just a little too high here. They could easily have run the fans like 35 decibels and gotten away with it, because we're chilling at 63 degrees with 40 watts of power. So I honestly wish I could turn the silent fans down even more than this. And when we're CPU bound in silent mode, it really doesn't change much of anything. It's sitting around 64 degrees, again, about 38, 39, 40 watts of power. So still a great result. And just for funsies here, here's a quick clip of 16 gigs assigned to the VRAM versus 8 gigs assigned to the VRAM, and we're GPU bound here. The only thing I'm seeing is an extra gigabyte going to virtual memory committed here on hardware info, although that seems to count both VRAM and regular RAM, so, you know, take that with a grain of salt. You're looking at like maybe 1 FPS, or you might even lose 1 FPS, so it's really about the same. I did notice, however, when you're super CPU bound, like I was here at like 1080p lowest settings, you did get like 5 or 6 more FPS when you're using 8 gigs of VRAM versus 16, which makes sense because the RAM has more room to breathe, giving the CPU a little extra juice. And last thing here, let's look at the temperatures of the chassis itself. So, you know, one thing that's nice is the temps are going to be pretty much perfect for the keyboard across all the power modes, because there's really nothing there that could get hot. But even the tablet itself doesn't get too hot. The hottest point in silent mode here was 35 degrees at the bottom of the laptop. Even on the back where like that motherboard part is, it's still only like 32 to 35. I think the hottest it gets is when like you're in balance or turbo mode. The middle to like top section gets up to like 37 to like low 40 degrees on the front and the back. But yeah, I feel like that's pretty expected for, you know, when it's under load, you're gaming here. And it's honestly not extremely high either, so it's still within a comfortable range without like burning your hand.
So this is as low as you can get the fan curves, unfortunately. So it's hard to give my recommended settings because those fans just get way too loud. Now I could say, like, since a lot of the power from the CPU is at that 45 watt range, you could easily get away with that in a game like Cyberpunk here. So right now we're getting about 60 FPS, right? This is at 45 watts. Balance mode gives us about the same FPS, but a lot quieter. So yeah, no matter what you're doing though, I'd recommend using UXTU and setting curve optimizer to about -25. But yeah, the CPU undervolt will just give you pretty much free performance. You set like a wattage cap, then you're getting a little better temperatures as well at that same wattage. So you actually can get manual fan control to work if you use the experimental version of G-Helper, which I'll link in the description, as well as rolling back the Asus System Control Interface driver, which only took a couple steps, but it is, yes, annoying. And this solves that super noisy turbo mode as well. You could easily get it down to less than 50 decibels. I'd say a good optimized turbo mode would be about 4,000 to 5,000 in fan speeds. You could probably push that wattage limit up to like 50 to 60 watts. And then a good balance mode would be less than 4,000 RPM and maybe, you know, in that 50 watt range or a little bit lower. And then if you want a good silent profile, take it down to like 40 watts and get your RPMs to around 3,000 or a tiny bit lower, and that gives you a good silent mode experience without destroying your FPS. Also, I have to address the elephant in the room here, and that's the lack of an XG mobile port. One of the biggest selling points of the Flow lineup from Asus, you know, the XG mobile port, which is essentially an Oculink port that connects an external GPU like this to something like this so that you can get a lot more GPU performance and you could carry it over for generations to come. You know, you just have one of these and you only upgrade this, which I bought this RTX 4090 XG mobile, right? A used Flow X16 4070 and an ROG Z13 for all less than like a new RTX 5080 laptop. But yeah, this thing is actually like a beast. I wish I had bought this and reviewed it sooner, but yeah, the value proposition, again, you know, you shell out a little bit on something like this, RTX 4090, but you can keep the same laptop for years to come and just keep upgrading these next time they have a new generation. But they kind of said, you know, no, we take that back. No more XG Mobile, but they're giving us a 2025 model that connects to Thunderbolt 5 instead. And yeah, it's backwards compatible with USB 4 and Thunderbolt 4 as well. According to them, they're saying the performance difference between the XG Mobile on USB 4 and Thunderbolt 5 is not as big as you might think. So I guess there's some hope there, although I'm still not super happy about it. Now, to be fair, their reasoning for doing this was that you could hook up an XG Mobile to literally any laptop you want, not even Asus, which I get it, but I still wish they at least kept the Oculink port, you know, on these devices, even the new ones, or just made like an adapter piece or something, you know, maybe to just adapt this to USB 4 or whatever. But now people who bought the 2022 model of the Flow X13 or something, they're not gonna have that chance to upgrade without getting a whole new laptop. So it has its pros and cons, but I just think the cons could have been easily avoided. So yeah, this is a great device for creators depending on what you're doing. First of all, latency mon results were pretty good, so good to see that. And then you've got that excellent color gamut and efficient CPU, so Photoshop and Lightroom will really benefit from this guy. Like, look at these Photoshop scores, leading the pack and by a decent bit too. And that holds true in balanced and silent mode as well. Like, it's just killing it compared to these thicker and heavier laptops. The story continues on battery as well, with only the Ryzen HX 370 coming close and, you know, sometimes surpassing it just a little bit. Premiere Pro is a different story though, because this relies more on the GPU, and since the Flow Z13 has a great integrated GPU but not a dedicated GPU, it does fall behind a bit here. However, I put it next to the closest iGPU I had in this chart just to give it some benefit of the doubt. It's still a really respectable score. Balanced and silent mode start to look a little better for it, climbing up a few spots, and then on battery, it climbs up a lot further, at least in balance mode. DaVinci Resolve relies on a decent balance of CPU and GPU, and it climbs nearly to the top here, which is crazy, essentially tying with the RTX 4090 G16, except for in the more GPU accelerated standard benchmark. It still does really well here though in its balance and silent modes, looking good, pretty close to the competition, and then on battery, especially in silent mode, it just pulls way ahead of everyone else. Lastly, I do a music benchmark that anybody can replicate for free using the trial version of Ableton Live's demo session. I tested it on Live 11 and 12, and it gets about 20 to 24% CPU load on the heavy parts of these songs, which all have tons of effects and tracks going on. So this is a really good result, and that's up there with like the best laptops I've tested.
All right, so let's talk about where this falls in comparison to other laptops. I'm gonna go in alphabetical order this time to make it easy. So starting with Apex Legends here, we've got the Flow Z13 hitting 107 FPS, 77 on 1% lows. This is one of those games where it does fall quite a bit behind other laptops for some reason, and the same sort of holds true in balance mode as well, although it does surpass the Omen 14 here, which is nice, since it really barely loses any FPS. Black Myth Wukong is one of the most GPU intensive games on the market. I know it's not looking great, but it does get better, I promise. Yeah, 12 FPS. And yeah, this is like the maxed out cinematic ray tracing high settings, It doesn't have DLSS either, so it's using FSR, so, it's not looking good compared to the competition. Of course, if you want to play this game, you're gonna have to lower settings, use AMD's frame generation, stuff like that. Call of Duty Black Ops 6, it's doing really good, 70 FPS in the extreme settings preset, and that's with no upscaling at all. And then on balance mode, it still holds pretty true at 55 FPS, so still looking really good there. Control is another one that is entirely GPU dependent and very NVIDIA friendly, so of course it's no surprise to see it at the bottom here with not having an NVIDIA GPU, so honestly not surprised to see that one. And then we have Cyberpunk, so you're gonna see a pattern here, DLSS, all those sort of things really benefit, of course, NVIDIA GPUs because they're the only ones who can use that. So RT Ultra, it is gonna be at the bottom, unsurprisingly, 35 FPS and 27 FPS in balance mode. You're gonna wanna turn down settings, of course, in this game. I also have the Omen Max 16 with the 5090 in this graph, just to kind of give you a little sneak peek there, so be sure you're subscribed because that review is coming soon as well, so we can talk about 50 series. On the Ultra preset, which does not use DLSS, now we're seeing it up there with these 4070 laptops. See, you're pretty much in line with even like the Legion 7i at 61 FPS. And then in balance mode, it does lose a little bit, going down to 46 FPS, but still great result overall. And I also threw in silent mode here just to give you an idea. It also holds its own in racing games pretty well. Forza Horizon 5, it's getting 79 FPS here, which is above a couple 4070s and almost at the level of some of these higher tier 4070 laptops too. In balance mode, it loses about 10 FPS, but nothing too crazy. And then in silent mode, we're looking at 55 FPS, so about in line with like the HP Omen 14 or Zephyrus G16. I also went and just tried it in 4K, and it actually surprised me, did pretty well at 52 FPS. I mean, again, 4K is not really going to be much of a thing on this guy, but if you turn down settings and stuff, I'm sure it could be easily playable. Helldivers 2 running around the ship on the Ultra preset, we're looking at 76 FPS in turbo mode, which is a pretty good result, right there in line with like the HP Omen 14, and then same thing in balance mode, where it only really falls behind a bit in silent mode. Horizon Zero Dawn doesn't look super good for the Flow Z13, it's getting 64 FPS, probably more in line with like an RTX 4050 laptop here, but in balance mode, it does start to catch up a bit, and then in silent mode, it's pretty much at the same level, maybe just a little bit lower than these other 4070s, kind of around that Omen 14 level. This was another one where I just threw in 4K just to see, 32 FPS, so honestly, it probably is playable if you turn down settings. And lastly, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is like one of my golden standard benchmarks, although it does sort of prefer NVIDIA still, getting 84 FPS at the highest preset with no DLSS, and then in balance mode, we're getting 68 FPS, so closest competitor being that 4070 65 watt from the Omen 14. I don't have any RTX 4060 laptops on this graph, but I'm sure it's probably in line with those guys. And in silent mode, it does surpass a few of these guys who just can't handle, lower wattage in silent mode, so that's good to see. Again, another one where I did 4K. Another 4K result here, 39 FPS, probably in line with what you would see out of like an RTX 4060 here, so nothing too surprising. Of course, you could turn on some upscaling or something like that and probably get to a playable frame rate. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I also try other settings as well, so I did 1080p. I was kind of surprised to see it sort of lower here since 1080p relies more heavily on the CPU, but still not terrible at 117 FPS. And I actually do this one on battery as well, and that's where we see the Z13 to start to pull ahead, 68 FPS, pretty much right up there with these other 4070 laptops. And then again, just to nail this point home, okay, USB-C power delivery, and this goes for pretty much every game, is where this thing really shines. We're getting 84 FPS, where a lot of these guys just cannot keep up. A lot of them limit their power heavily on USB-C, plus you're not losing any battery discharge by doing this either. You're getting the full performance of the laptop on USB-C power delivery, while these other guys, you have to plug in, their 240 watt, 300 watt power brick to get to that level that they were before. And I thought this might be kind of funny because, this is an integrated GPU. If we compare it to like the HX 370 on the G16 or like the Radeon 780M, look at that. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's, using some more wattage than those guys, but even if you match the wattage, it is like far surpassing even the nearest iGPU.
So, I mean, sure, overall, overall, it's not really blowing the competition away in the gaming department, but I have to keep reminding myself, like, this is an integrated GPU running at only like 70 watts shared with the CPU, while these other guys here are running at over 100 watts on their GPUs and like 20 to 40 watts or more on their CPUs. So basically like 70, 80 watts of power versus like 140 watts of power, or even up to like 250 watts of power on some of the big boys. So we're talking, you know, the competition's using like double the wattage, even sometimes quadruple the wattage, all right? And of course, most of the laptops on my charts are on the higher end of the performance spectrum. You know, we have like higher tier 4070s, 4080s, and 4090s on there. Whereas if you compare this to like 4050, 4060, all that stuff, it looks a lot better. And you know, it's a tablet, you know, right? So it's more in line with something like an Ultrabook like this, rather than something like this, which will make your arm fall off. So yeah, in comparison to the others, it is really impressive. You're getting levels of performance of almost an RTX 4070 out of a tablet. So I can't really complain. Like, I'm just shocked to be seeing this in 2025, to be honest. You know, it's not knocking the 2023 Z13 out of the park in gaming, but it is knocking out the last model in pretty much every other area, especially considering the iGPU and of course the CPU part as well. So yeah, overall, this device is crazy. Insane, actually. The price is a little insane too. The model I have here is about $2,300 in the US, with the 64GB going for only like $100 more at Best Buy for some reason. However, I did see some open box ones going for less than that already, but finding stock is pretty hard. The 128GB version is about $3,000 in the US, which is high, but that's a pretty niche config. Overall, I'm actually pretty surprised it isn't priced much higher than most RTX 4070 laptops, because it offers much more CPU performance than pretty much all of them, and similar GPU performance, and of course, you know, much more portability as well. I mean, people often put value on how much FPS you can get per dollar, which is fair for some people, but that's not the main reason why anyone would buy this device. That just isn't the value proposition at all. It has way more to offer than FPS in games. The value is in having capabilities that you can't get anywhere else in a tablet device. We're talking about a CPU that somehow surpasses almost anything on the market today, maybe even making Apple start to sweat. And your homeboy's decked out desktop PC, yeah, he's looking a little scared of this guy too. But we've also got really good battery life and levels of GPU performance around, you know, RTX 4060, almost a 4070 from a tablet. I'll say it once again, this is a tablet. The real crime here is that this CPU isn't really available anywhere else other than this guy and like a couple more okay laptops from MSI and HP. But like, imagine a G14 or a G16 with this CPU. Like, the iGPU part won't even really matter at that point, but just give me this CPU and this device, please. Jesus, come on. Literally, people like racing to Best Buy. That's like free money if you do that, Asus. Seriously. Just give us a G16 with this CPU and like a 5070 Ti, 5080. They're gonna be flying off the shelves. Like, I have no idea why CPU isn't in everything on the market right now, because it really be. I don't know if that was an oversight by AMD or what, but seriously, like, this thing is awesome. This is simply an incredible piece of tech and a huge step forward for Windows devices. Even if you're not into gaming, this device is amazing for photo, video editing, Photoshop, Lightroom, DaVinci Resolve, all of that. It's giving MacBook levels of performance from the CPU, like M4 Pro, M4 Max, it's approaching those even. And it pushes beyond that even once you go past like that 50, 60 watt level. Of course, those are still untouched in single core and battery life and power on battery. But, you know, listing out the overall pros and cons here, you have extreme portability compared to most gaming laptops. You can even use it strictly as a tablet if you want. It has really good pen support, beautiful and super bright display with Gorilla Glass, insane cooling for a tablet, great port selection for a tablet, that eats the competition for breakfast and undervolts really easily to even further eat said competition with like a side of dessert. You've got the most powerful integrated graphics out there with no need for a mux switch, no warm keyboard. It's built gaming on USB-C is the same as it is with the 200 watt power brick. You can reallocate RAM and VRAM with up to 128 gigs, good battery life, surprisingly awesome folio keyboard, rear-facing 4K webcam if that's your thing. And, you know, there is the potential that the XG Mobile might actually give a really good graphics performance jump. That is, if it's as good as Asus is saying it's going to be over USB 4. Now, in the future though, I would still like to see the fan tuning improved a little bit, since I think the silent mode under load and the turbo mode is also also going to be too loud for some people. I'd love to see the battery life improved even more on the next version. Maybe an OLED version of this would be really nice. Definitely would like to see better speakers, you know, on the next model. And most of all, I'd love to see it get to a point where gaming on battery could actually last more than a couple hours. There's potential there. And of course, I would kill to see a Flow X13 or an X16 with this CPU, or just any other laptop that has like a dedicated GPU attached. So I know that was a lot, and thank you guys for sticking around. Like, thank you. But I had a lot to say about this device. It is truly something special. And overall, I really love the Flow Z13. It's crazy to say this because I'm not a tablet guy at all, really, but I think this is one of the most impressive devices I have ever tested. It's definitely not for everyone. A traditional gaming laptop definitely has its advantages, but boy, if you're after portability and like the best CPU on the market, then look no further, all right? But thank you guys for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you haven't subscribed yet, I have a lot of stuff coming on the way, and all those subscriptions really help. Currently, not many of my viewers are actually subscribed to the channel, so I would love to change that in the future. Those are the things that help get me more laptops coming my way so that I can put out more videos, better videos, and keep doing this, right? So thanks again, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one.